So I'm very honored to have Tomás. Tomás got in touch with me a few months ago because he was traveling to Madrid, and he has a lot of interesting projects in Chile, and there is a lot of overlapping between our research agenda. And he wanted to meet us and spend a couple of days with us. And so I suggest him to give like this seminar to have an idea of what he's doing. And then he will be with us today and maybe tomorrow morning as well. Yeah, so welcome, and the floor is yours.
You.
I hope that this can be like
many thanks, Mario. I'm very happy to be here and to discuss with you guys, because my feeling is that we have a lot of things in common on my research agenda, but also on the works of that many of you are doing, and we've been talking along those days with Adrian and others. So I just wanted to discuss some of my current work. As Mario said, that was planned as a very informal seminar, so just more like sort of a discussion for opening agendas and trying to set up if we are done doing some stuff, what can we do in the future. Okay, let me move. Okay, what I will do three things. First, I just wanted to set out in a very broad manner, which is my background, my theoretical background in terms of the things I'm trying to do when it comes to post-growth, circular economy, and climate action. And then I will be talking about two research areas. One is a project that we are currently closing, which is called the Social Life of Clean Tech. So I will be talking there of some of the cases we are doing, and more specifically, I will try to describe some of the work we did on circular economy, and we're still writing about that. And then I will move on to another project we are currently doing, which is a catalog for local technologies. We've been doing it since the beginning of the pandemic, and we may be probably doing it for the next few years. So it's something that we are really like doing it. We've been cataloging many areas of Chile, trying to found grassroots innovations, and we also create a platform for circulate that. So I just wanted to discuss that with you and just hear what you think about what you're doing. So this is more or less, and just as I said at the beginning, this was supposed to be a very informal talk, just to find things in common. So I'm very happy if you want to interrupt me and you want to ask me things. I just put all these slides here because I wanted to have a more general informative slides, but there is not a proper paper or nothing like that. Okay. So, well, first, I would say that something that we really have in common, we've been discussing with Mario and Adrian, and yesterday we have a very interesting dinner when we touched some of those topics, is this idea of trying to do some research from, in my case, from a more STS and economic sociology perspective, to problematize the limits that eco-modernist approach to climate action has. So, well, you probably know, I just look at the books you have there. I mean, eco-modernism is probably one of the main ways in which policymakers and scholars are trying to think about climate action, how can we produce environmental change. And it has to do with this idea that innovation and technological change is at the center, or probably are the main tools for prevent socio-environmental collapse. That we can do that, so we can try to deal with the climate crisis by creating new technologies or doing innovation, and at the same time, by doing that, we can also provide well-being and also keep with economic growth. In some versions, also, eco-modernism has also this idea that we can do it by also keeping market growth. We can create a sort of new market green economy. So for me, and probably for most of you, like eco-modernism is problematic in terms that it has some ideas, some common ideas that I think that they got stuck as, and they are problematic in terms of trying to accelerate climate action. And I would say like three that I'm really interested in researching. One, the first is this idea that often more eco-modernist approaches tend to depolitize the problem of environmental action. That's something that I think it just becomes a matter of efficiency or technological development as it becomes a technical matter. You may probably know the book that brought Bill Gates. We just have a very progressive president, but we were very sad to see that he was reading that book as soon as he got the presidency. It was the book that he has in his hand. That this is a very famous techno-fixing book, you know. So it's a list of solutions. The second problem with eco-modernism, I would say, is that it has to do with the first one, but it is that it often avoids the idea of conflict as something that is constitutive of climate action and climate change, or environmental change. And this is what he often tried to think, this idea of bringing everything all together under this sort of umbrella concept such as sustainability, for instance. So whenever you talk to someone who works on environmental economy, he will say, no, we can keep on, we have to focus on the three impacts. So we can do it all together. There are not frictions here, which I think it's a standing point that is problematic. And the third one is the fact that in many ways eco-modernism as a way of approaching environmental and climate action, it has problem with the issue of difference and multiplicity. It tries to create one programmatic mode of intervention, and so it lacks the possibility to explore the different and multiple sustainable futures that we can find in different areas, countries, territories, and groups. So I approach that that problematic space, which is of course very broad, by making some questions that come from STS and economic sociology. One of my main concerns has to do with what I call the value question. I mean, the problem of who and how we define what matters when we're doing environmental change. How is value enacted there? Which values? How are values? Which are the friction between them? My second interest, which is new, and I have to say that is relatively new, but since I met Adrian like 6-7 years ago, we have started working on that. Like he was very inspiring. Is this idea of trying to work on alternatives to eco-modernism approach, or try to think around ways of engaging on technological change while at the same time not being eco-modernist. And the third one, which is more the tools that I use, I just wanted to say that in order to engage for probably some of your also theoretical backgrounds, is that I try to do that using tools from science and technology studies. We just were there at the conference in Madrid, and economic sociology as a tool for doing a more empirical critique of eco-modernism. So I would say that is the more general background. Just saying that, I just wanted to tell you about two different type of projects we've been doing in Chile. Of course, there are others. We just were talking about some energy works on energy community we doing our energy infrastructures, but I just wanted to focus on the type of project I think that very close to your work here. So the first is this project that we call the Social Life of Clean Tech, which basically it consisted of doing different ethnographic and case study work on a set of clean tech companies and regulatory bodies. I mean, by clean tech, we define this sort of big group of people trying to create new technologies that can solve any type of environmental problems, either in energy or waste or other areas. We see the clean technologies as, from a more STS perspective, as a practical achievement. I mean, so we wanted to see at the different practices, devices, and the forms of situated knowledge that helped to bring those technologies to exist. But what we've been trying to do is to map inside those different clean tech worlds the different frictions and tensions between economic and non-economic mode of valuing those spaces. So based on that background and all the things that we were discussing before, we've been doing empirical work on circular economy. I just will be telling you some examples about that. On distributed generation, which is a branch of energy production, which is based on community and distributed infrastructures. We're also starting some work on green hydrogen. There is currently a huge hype of green hydrogen in Chile. And we have another project which is on carbon capture and sequestration with people from Oxford and Mexico and other countries. So this is an agenda which is quite broad, but I will be focusing mostly on circular economy because I know that this is something that we have deeply in common. Just as a matter of to illustrate that, I just wanted to tell you about a paper we recently wrote, which basically worked on this assumption, which is very common on the clean tech and environment or green business sector, of the win-win. You may probably have heard that many times. So, which is this idea that people may try to find solutions to the environmental crisis while at the same time getting very rich. You know, we will be rich, but we will also solve the problem of the economy, of the environment. So we just published a paper on that, which was problematizing this narrative of the win-win, and the work was based on ethnography and interviews with people from different circular economy startups. They were mostly companies as small organizations that were creating new technologies or work with different specific areas of waste reduction or to create new resources or material. And what we did was to talk to them, to visit them, and to hear their narratives on why they do what they do and why they think what they do is valuable. For doing that, we use a theoretical framework that came from economic sociology and STS, which is a more like narrative understanding of value. That value is not something that exists there, but it also has to be performed, it has to be organized as a plot with some characters who confer value with some evaluative framework. So after those interviews and after visiting the companies and talk to the owners and senior managers of they were very small companies anyway. They were not like huge. They were not Siemens or they were small companies, but they were starting to work out. We worked on trying to find out the different forms in which value was defined and mobilized on those narratives. Okay. Okay, and of course, we were just talking what we found and what we wanted to push in that article. You are happy to read it. I can send you the PDF if you want. Is that basically, even though the win-win narratives that are all around the clean tech sectors, they push with this idea that we can do both things at the same, those value grammars are completely asymmetrical. So in many of the companies we visit, we noted that even though environmental impact was relevant, was important, was a core element in their identity, in their own vocation, at the very end, the way in which value was orchestrated as a practical form was in economic terms. And this has to do with, I will not go in deep into the paper because I just wanted to discuss several topics, but of many things which are very practical, but that show us how complicated is this problem of having to conciliate different value grammars in environmental action. Let me explain a little bit three of them. First, this idea of business opportunity and business model as a common device that organizes everything. So if you want to do something in terms of doing a startup, is despite of the different type of vocation you have to have a working business model, and this is very restrictive. So it have to work in terms of creating profit. And so a lot of the people who were interviewing, they had very good ideas, but they have to reduce those ideas or adapt them to the framework of the business model. The second thing we found was the question we made to ourselves were which are the main judgments of value? Who are the ones who define which is important and which is not? And we found that for all of them, there were two main publics for to say. First, the clients, and the other were the investors. Both of them, of course, they were just defining the value of the startups, but mostly as a matter of something that can be an object of investment or have a market price. And finally, we also, in the paper, we delve into this idea of economic survival of the companies as the final and ultimate measure of impact. So a lot of people that were creating very interesting, artifacts or technology services, they said to us, okay, we can do very interesting technical things, but at the very end, the only thing we really need to do is to be profitable. Otherwise, we will disappear and our creation will disappear with us. So, well, the thing is that all those points, basically, we raise it in the paper as a way of trying to think around the problem of how can we conciliate those different spheres of grammars of value. We end up claiming that basically the problem with circular economy in its current form is that it basically offers a very fragile grammar of value, which in this attempt of conciliating different value worlds, it ends up making one the dominant, which is the economic value. So, okay, well, this is one example about the circular economy, but we've been also doing that type of research on other empirical cases around clean tech. We just started, or we are doing some interviews around the issue of green hydrogen as a new, very eco-modernist, huge technology that is, at least in Chile, but in other places of the world, is sort of mobilizing a very deep idea of global transformations of energy system, of big energy systems. So we wanted to explore the different socio-technical imaginaries around that, and to compare that with other bottom-up, very grassroots type of creating and using energy, like biogas, for example. So we're comparing that. We also, in those cases, we're trying to see the different mode of value, or define impact, who defines value, how, when, which are the frictions, those types of things. We are also starting to do ethnography on some demonstration sites of those technologies. So in Chile, in the south, in Patagonia, they are creating a lot of small art installations where they want to show that this is going to be the next big thing in the energy transition. We also we are doing some work on carbon capture and sequestration, but well, the thing is that this is an agenda that we also did some stuff on distributed generation, but I think by exploring the circular economy case, I may try to explain that, which I think is something that is broader than that. So which are one of the things we want to push from this agenda on the social life of technologies? I think one first idea is this is a more programmatic probably agenda, but this is the idea of trying to move beyond the win-win ideas, or probably doing less work on trying to find a global synthesis, like sort of sustainability as a broad concept, and more work on problematizing the frictions around inside those concepts. Because under that framework, usually the complications and the tensions are not seen. So I think that we need to do more work on showing the fragility and tensions inside those sort of economic / environmental interventions. We also think that we need to push to find another language to framing technological intervention. That's a language that moves beyond the idea of economic opportunities, business models. That involves a lot of creative work of defining alternative forms of measuring value, defining value. What do we mean by impact? Why do we have to define impact at the very end in monetary terms? Do we have other type of mode of valuing or devices for valuing technological development on the climate or the environmental area? And the last idea we want to push also strongly is this idea that we need to also democratize valuation as a space. I mean, basically, we need to bring more people, different people, into the discussion of what matters when it comes to technological interventions. That somehow, at this moment, a discussion which is very technical in the hands mostly of economics or like some engineers, but I think we need to, given the incredible magnitude of the crisis and the challenge, we need to bring other relevant audience into the discussion of what matters and who defines which intervention do we want to do and why. Okay, so this is one of the type of work we're doing. And the second part of the presentation was as probably remember at the beginning of the presentation, I said that we were talking about the social life of technology, but then I wanted to show you a little bit of the work we've been doing with a grassroots, work with local technologies. It will be just the opposite, or more specifically, we've been working. I'm gonna move faster here because I just want to have more time for this discussion, but we wanted to complement more critical social science with a work on trying to develop tools for change. Well, there is a very important and long tradition in Latin America on trying to set up and to map grassroots innovation, like Adrian and others just wrote a wonderful book mapping that discussion. So inspired with that, but with the idea of trying to create something instead of just criticizing, eco-modernism or other, we move on to create this catalog. The catalog, it seeks to find to map local technologies that we think are maybe tools for environmental and transformative climate action. And the principles in which it's inspired had to do with the work that many of you have done here. Well, Mariano wrote a wonderful paper that they published a couple of years ago that I found very inspiring as well when I was organizing the catalog, or the more theoretical discussion at least. So what we were mapping in the catalog were local technologies that had some collective definitions of problem and questions, so they were not imposed by others, like technicians or government experts, in which the people had the control over the uses and results of those, that push some form of conviviality in terms of like the way of Mario and Mariano nicely put it in, and it has to do with the Illich work. And also that provides the sources for seeing and inspire possible and desirable futures. So in a more technical matters, and based on those principles, we start mapping in different territories in Chile, different artifacts, strategies or practice that solve a very specific problem in different territories, and they were created or adapted by communities in relationship to specific things, such as, for instance, water scarcity, environmental damage. For example, a lot of people who live in the countryside in Chile, because of the water scarcity, in the hills are deteriorating, or agroecological tools. And so we wanted to map them and to see how many are, how they work, which is their history as a tool. But we keep in mind that we wanted them to be part of the community. So they were owners of the definition of problem and questions, and also over the uses. So, well, the catalog, well, we were a team of 7 persons. We were sociologists, anthropologists, and engineer and engineer agronomo, like illustrators, editors. So we basically we partnered with a local NGO that work, a national NGO that worked in several territories in Chile, and working with them, we identify some people who were doing interesting, were developing people or communities interesting tools, or they modify tools that were given by the government. So, and then we visited them. We interviewed them. We wanted to know why they developed that technologies, how they come from, who were there, and how did they relate to the environmental crisis in different areas. And also we wanted to see how their tools and themselves embody some possible futures, which are alternatives. So what you see there, it's this is a workflow of the catalog. So we visited them, then we made recording interviews, then we create a register, a ficha. We validate them in the technical matters with the engineer who read that and say, oh, when you say plastic, it's actually PVC, blah, blah. So he gave some more technical background. Then we edited, and then we create some vignettes, and we publish them in the platform. Okay, so you are happy to look at the platform. The web page is tecnologiaslocales.cl. We already have 54 technologies of different types, like relating to water, energy, productive work, care of environment, and reusing. We will have another round of cataloging during next month, and we want to keep doing it in a probably in a slow manner, because of course it depends on the funding we have, but we want to keep the catalog alive. So we will be working on that. Why is this called a catalog? Because we know that we will not be able to map everything. So we are doing also a curatorial work of trying to identify and to go on mapping and inviting people to be part of it. Those are one of the technologies we identify. There are much more of them in the web page. But the thing is that we did this catalog not for us as a scholar or for me, like to discuss it with you, but mostly for the people in the communities, in the territories, even ourselves as someone who is living in a place, to use those artifacts or also from others and to connect. So in a sense, the whole design of the catalog that we did with user interface designer, and we did a lot of workshops for finding the final form, was as a device or as an infrastructure, as we were just discussing with Adrian a few days ago, for sharing ideas or artifacts. So whenever you go into the catalog, you can print at the register. So you can, for instance, if you live in the countryside, you can clap it in your kitchen, for instance, and to have some ideas. Or this is one of the ways in which it can circulate. Or you can circulate that feature in your WhatsApp group, or in your community, or in the municipality building. But also, through the catalog, you can contact the people who create the technology. And we work as mediators with the NGO that our partners, who had all the territorial density that we don't have as scholars. So if someone wants to know, for example, more about technology for capturing water, they will write to us in the catalog people, and we will reach the people or the person or the community who create that, and we will bring them in touch. So this is one of the work we are starting to do. And the second one, or the third one, I would say, is we wanted this catalog to be used more and more. So we have started to think of doing activities or to accelerate the use of the catalog. So For instance, we've been discussing the idea of doing technical visits. So that means inviting people from one community to visit other community who develop something interesting and to get in touch with them and to share the same problems probably. Or also to do some technical fair, like low-tech or post-growth technical fairs, so people can realize which alternative they have a very low cost for several spaces. Okay, I think I will leave this for that because I've been talking too much. I just wanted to close in terms of the catalog that when doing that, of course, we also trying to think more like theoretically or more scholarly about what does it mean to do a catalog and why does it help in terms of trying to accelerate transitions or deep transformations. And I think that there are three things we've been trying to work on. The first, it has to do with the problem of scale. We've been talking about that during those days, that in a sense, the global climate crisis has this problem that we know that this is a very global problem, but we also know that we need to act locally. So how can we bring those different programs all together? And then you have people which are probably more like some engineers or they're coming from policy that wanted to do something very big, but end up being very abstract. But other people who is trying to do some case studies or work very locally, but it's going to take a lot of time if we want to make that having a global impact. So I think that in that sense, the catalog wants to be a technology for accelerate circulation of local ideas. So, but I think we need to put more thinking or more efforts on thinking how can we accelerate or how can we multiply local interventions, because otherwise they will not work. So I think this is a very important for us idea because it's trying to connect somehow different worlds, like local development or more critical STS stances or anthropological work with more policy-oriented, government-oriented work on environmental change. The second reflection has to do with the fact that when we did the first round of the catalog with these 54 technologies, we didn't found pristine objects. We weren't expecting to find that either, but I think that it is very interesting, and particularly coming from Latin America, to see the juxtapositions, the mixtures, the adaptations. So many of the things we found were adaptations for very old policy programs, for instance, or even United Nations installations during the 90s that someone just modified. So this is what we use the concept of the Barroco. There is a famous Argentine scholar that she talks about economías barrocas, like as a way of trying to highlight the fact that all these type of interventions are not purely local. They mixed a lot of different logics. And the last and final issue that has to do with the argument I was trying to make in the first part is that in the catalog, we also saw these tensions between different value grammars. In this case, for instance, you could easily see that most of the artifacts we mapped were oriented to the reproduction of ordinary life and the maintaining of nature as a space of the environment, as a space in which people live. So it was about keeping my chakra alive. It was about getting more water. It wasn't about finding a business opportunity, scaling up, or having a competitive advantage. So, and we found a very striking difference between the type of value grammars that organize the catalog artifacts and the ones that are pushed through the governments, at least from Chile, around this idea of technological transference, viability, scaling up, which I think it needs to be discussed because, of course, as I was saying before, the economic one may end up killing the other one. So anyway, this is more or less, of course, just talk, but this is what we are doing and we will keep doing probably during a few years.
closer as well. Question from our STS people. Question from our eco-Marxism people.
I have a quick, because I wrote that down, sorry. It's about this whole idea of economic value being determined. I think it would be more useful to look at it from a more historical perspective. Because if I see the Indian context, I don't know much about Chile. I don't think economic logic was dominant. If you see the historical perspective. I think it would be more useful to connect it with the neoliberalism, the burst with the new. Because if you look at previous policy documents, and I can even talk to people like scientists, social good was more important to them than economic. So I think I don't know in your case, but it might be useful to look at that from historical. How economic logic became dominant, and how you can show that it's not something that exists forever.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree. I have a colleague who's been working in Chile trying to unearth the advisors and policy managers from before neoliberalism in Chile, when we have the socialist experiment, and that type of documentation disappeared. They were like manuals of how to do policy. It was in the late 60s, early 70s. Because I think it would be very interesting to see how can we do environmental, change without having to bring all the water into the economic side or cost-benefit analysis. And so I think historical work will be critical there.
I think before giving the words to one, now I don't want to advertise my PhD work, but in my PhD thesis, I'm claiming that the discourse of developments at the end of the 70s and with the advent of neoliberal and neoliberalism changed the discourse into innovation. And then start innovation with together, it's a complex phenomenon together with the new Schumpeterianism, evolutionary economics, really got the emphasis and the moments and gain the moments and people also in development sectors later, like in the 90s and the 20s, start talking about innovation, entrepreneurship, startups, BOP, especially in India. I documented this in comparing people's science movement strategy and the neoliberal thought in India, for example. So I think Poonam is a very good point.
Absolutely.
It's like the emphasis on startups and business models. Now you have courses and modules on the Indian Institute of Management all around India about business models for the BOP. And this is something that was really like an evolution. Because if you read the policy document in India, but also many, like if you read Arturo Escobar, this was about not like creating enterprises or companies. It's really was like kind of top-down kind of approach, no? Adrian and then Javier.
Well, that's back to value. I don't know. In my respect, value always keep coming up, and I kind of avoid it because it's such a. One day, what are the differences, value, and that sort of thing. But Thomas, there's one thing you said, and it's all the great things you said about if when you were talking about the hydrogen, these demonstrations. And I was thinking that like the relationship between like maybe values, formally institutional ones or more informal ones, whether they're intrinsic or extrinsic values. Because in a demonstration, there are lots of different individuals and organisations involved, but the value in the demonstration to them is quite plural and varied, isn't it? If you're a design consultancy, you just want to, there's some value in doing a demonstration project. I don't know, if you're the middle manager of project management, you just want to show that you're organising that. You know what I mean? So there's this sort of plurality of values going around, and not all of them are necessarily need for things to succeed or grow. So anyway, it's just a sort of observation. And the other thing with value is like time frames involved, and obviously in economics, you have to be economics, discount rates, and the more immediate value, later value, impacts the value in the longer term.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, I think this is why doing ethnographic work on those cases is interesting, because we will expect to find different versions of what it matters. Of course, there are some which are dominant. You could see it in the official documentation, or when you interview the CEO or the top. But you also have in the territories, you have friction. So many of the people who are creating those projects, they think themselves as sort of the one who, like Bill Gates, they will go with a green technology into the Patagonia, they will bring employee money, and they will save the world, the environment crisis. But in the territories, I mean, they haven't even started, and they already started to be a lot of conflicts about, material problems, about around the farm where the project is being installed. So we expect to find a lot of those sort of frictions. Yeah, but studying demonstration, I think, is very interesting in that sense, that if people want to show whenever they want to project the future, they want to project on the entity.
Yeah, the discourse of value is super interesting also for Galician case. But we have this, it's not demonstration phase, it's already implementation and instruction about wind farms in Galicia. And now the conflict is slowly increasing. Because for in the initial phase, there was like, okay, we are accepting this because this is the future, we are getting money, this is producing like green energy. The junta is paying us, but now all the bad side, the dark side, is becoming more and more visible, and there are conflicts that are emerging, and some of them are about the value. So how we value territories, how we value land, how land was valued in the past. There was like a common mancomunidad project, like the land was shared in common between different people. So I think it's fascinating. But I also quite afraid about the value theories, and it's a very slippery field, no?
Absolutely.
And I'm a bit scared to get into that field as well.
I really enjoyed your talk, and also it's very close to some of the stuff. I also come from the consumption study, values, the evaluation, one of the key areas. I really like most of the stuff you said. I really like the metaphor you use of value grammar. So because the point of grammar is in language is to enable communication, right? You share a grammar and communicate. I suppose when it comes to value evaluation in grammar, it is the same idea. Like the knowledge that there is this value grammar has to be shared. So I don't know, something I'd like to see. Maybe you can talk us about that. Is because the point about economic grammar, value grammar, based on economistic thinking, is that they enable coordination very easily, like between actors, right? Like there is sort of purified values, and they create standards, and then it's easy to move resources and exchange. So, have you done any work in terms of how these alternative valuation grammars enable coordination, communication, or on the other hand, perhaps they become a problem because they are more locally grounded, or maybe they're not shared as widely, and they are all more open to contestation or disagreement. I don't know. Have you thought about this?
Well, this is a super interesting question. No, I haven't. Which I've been very obsessed in the research we've been doing is in this idea that because we are in the sustainability world, so in the type of research we're doing, so in that space, people claim to follow and to make compatible different worlds, which I think are more incompatible that the people think. I mean, in the technology area. So we've been working harder on trying to see which are the frictions and the problems between those grammars. But as you said, one fantastic word would be to think, okay, if we write out of Of course, we can never write out of completely of the economic one, but which type of alternative measures? We were just discussing that in one of the presentations in EST. How can we formalize value in a different manners, which is not the radically other, it's not something that you cannot grasp, but it can circulate easier, because otherwise it always end up, environmental impact end up being translated into economic cost. I think you see this new world of ecosystem services, for instance, of private conservation. So there are all manners in which people that are very well intentioned, they said, if we don't bring a price into this, it will disappear. So why don't we start, defining which is how many money does Fox has, so how can we do a counterbalance that movement and to create grammars of value that can move onto the economic or take it some space at least? Which I think that would be a wonderful question to do.
This is a really interesting conversation for me. I mean, thank you for your presentation, but also I've never met any of you before, and this is the exact thing that I was like, I want to talk about this moment of your talk, and so I was fascinated that this is in fact the part of the talk that everybody wanted to talk about, which makes all of the questions that I prepared seem so much more wonderful. But mostly I just want to hear a little bit more, because I think this business about how we should approach value and how there's this conversation that's baked into whenever we set an endpoint or whenever we describe something good is kind of fascinating, because there's the one world in which you say, okay, that measure is sort of having these adverse effects, let's come up with a different measure, and then there's this sort of how can we imagine otherwise question, which I don't have an answer to, and I want you to have an answer for me to, which is how can we escape? Is there a world in which we escape the value problem entirely? And I think the answer is probably not in this world, but is that one we're striving for. I mean, I was thinking about being on something like hiring panels in the US, where right now we're very concerned with the long legacy of racism in the United States. And one of the ways that we then assign value to particular candidates is by these sort of shallow identity measures. And so we want to solve the diversity problem, but we do it through this conversation kind of framework, which doesn't seem quite right, even though I'm incredibly committed to the overall problem of accounting for these long legacies of harm. And so I guess, so you were talking about seeking other language, and I think that, because I was, as you were, during your comment, I was thinking, okay, is it not language, but is it vernacular? Is it like not the words, but is it the way of speaking? And then I think grammar is also a framework that is helpful for me to think about this. But I guess, are there ways that we can get closer to resisting this framework of optimization? Where, because that always seems to be economic, it always seems like there's this profit motive or this working winning motive or something, where the maybe the thing that I want to escape is the maximization problem and not necessarily the economization problem. Or maybe those are the same. Anyway, so I guess I'm curious how then you discount, like in what ways do you have to give up the hope of escaping this problem, or is it still working towards?
I mean, if I can add something to that, it's not only the optimization, but also the hierarchization.
Yeah.
Evaluation can higher as well. Like, you cannot have evaluation. I don't know, maybe you can, but at the moment, I cannot imagine like an evaluation system where there is no hierarchization attached to it.
Yeah, there's always a sort of like implicit set of norms, and there's always a power attached to them. And they're generally not the power that I want. So how do you get that better?
Yeah. Well, I think that is a wonderful question, but I would say that probably we need to escape from the idea of trying to find a common ground. I think we need to embrace more happily frictions and conflicts as constitutive of this, and probably to devise tools for dealing with these incompatibilities. For instance, like this is not related directly to this, but in Chile, in the more political ecology world, there has been a lot of discussion around this new green, like Mario was saying, solar panels, big installations. So they bring a lot of conflict. And then what people who are installing those panels cannot understand is that there is not a common ground in some cases. So the right to say no is like, it's not going to work, but we can talk, I mean, the people try to be very Habermasian, like we will have an agreement. Some things there are not agreement. As we were just discussing about post-growth, like there's someone going to have to decrease, it is not going to be. So this is why I'm really afraid of this sort of umbrella or common ground concepts such as sustainability, or the new ones are coming, green economy, because they tend to hide the fact that at the very end, this is going to be more agonistic in the sense that we will not find a common agreement. And I think if we realize that, we may start trying to work on finding tools for settlements, for managing the disagreement, but we will not find them. I found this idea of we need to take care of the three impacts: sustainable, social, and economic. No, environmental, economic, and social. It's at the very end. It's not so true. It's a way of hiding the problem of incompatibility. Not in any case. I don't say that it's one or the other, but there is going to be a lot of agonistic conflict between those worlds.
Adrian.
Maybe one of your slides, you said on some of these local technologies, you had like seen them as a business opportunity and then values, particular kinds of values on it, versus just the daily impacts, yeah, and sort of quotidianos, yeah, and then it's one of the costs, that's the point.
Yeah.
And that to me makes maybe one way of sidestepping the value issues is to think about capabilities and how these local in the like MIT7 kind of sense, how these local technologies kind of extend or enable certain kinds of capabilities, and it's these capabilities that one looks at. And it's something we try to do when we're looking at maker spaces in the UK. You open up to people that come in and they can access digital technologies. And we did work with users to see what kind of capabilities they were realizing through that kind of mapping capabilities. But then one of the ones they thought about was sort of kind of livelihoods, how to kind of get livelihoods to what they were doing. So then I guess maybe kind of that's where in a UK context, livelihoods means kind of selling stuff, that sort of kind of values kind of sneak in through that door. I don't know, Thomas, if that thinking of these local technologies as capabilities, would that help? Or, especially you asked us at the East Conference about infrastructures, this is infrastructure for a community. Does that
Yeah, absolutely. I think the concept of the idea of infrastructures of the platform, the catalog, not probably the artifacts too, but the platform as an infrastructure for designing ways, I think is very interesting. My point would be that at the very end, I mean, this is when my sort of more programmatic side arises. Like we will also need to deal at the higher levels with the policy governments, and so this is very problematic in Chile because you may have a lot of grassroots technologies or things happening, but when you move on to the environmental ministry or the policymaker, they will all ask you to fill a form in which you have to provide evidence that your project is going to scale and have an international market. So this is going to be the end. So there is more like, this is when you move up, and then you have to think about like, okay, how can we hack the system at that scale, not just at the end. So my mind is tensioned in that sense.
I'm thinking that these things, infrastructure, but for example, I mean, you have all the spades on the
yeah.
So one way I think the infrastructure, it's not like, or the maker space, a big one, certainly in the UK, and then actually in a lot of places where it tries to, these are incubators for entrepreneurship, startups and everything like you say. But in some places they say, well, these are libraries, this is public infrastructure.
Yep.
And providing people with tools, it's a tool library. So then you look at it quite differently. And so the value, or the reason you'll want invest resources or give people libraries to run these places, or the kinds of outreach activities you do, look quite different if you think of it as public infrastructure, 21st century compared to incubators and
Or maybe, if you make a policy change in which those spaces, infrastructures like a hackerspace, it's also taking part on defining the goals of a policy making. For example, what happened there, it's linked to the high-level decisions going to be taken. I don't know how, but maybe those are also ways of trying to hack this sort of.
First of all, I really enjoyed your talk, and I mostly agree with all the points that you made. I will not focus on the first aspect, which was more on the economic values and how economic values have become dominant, and how we talked about brain drain and everything in economic terms. But I will focus on the second aspect of your talk, which was on the local technologies. Just like the idea of economic value, and within the economic value, how the idea of efficiency and market has become the dominant idea. I think even when we talk about local technology, just like the economic values, I think even like we as researchers, so it's not only engineers or scientists and others are creating values. We have also got trapped into this idea of environmentalizing everything. So the local is again valued in terms of environmental impact. So, it's important that we do not also environmentalize each and every aspect of the technology. So when we link it with the global related with climate change, that we end up environmentalizing the technology. And when we are trying to unfold the different meanings of the technology, we need to go beyond this local versus the global. Because when many of these technologies would have emerged, they may have emerged with different kind of value systems. So, for instance, like utilitarian value, or like some agricultural values would have been there, which would have dominated for the growth of those technologies. But now, when we are reintegrating the technology in the age of environment, in the age of climate change, we are overemphasizing, we are seeing them through the lens of environment. So, for instance, like I have been doing this work in India, where I have tried to analyze the varied kind of irrigation technologies in South Korea. And in South Korea, in 1980s, there was a famous paper where an economist has written on traditional irrigation technology. And since then, many people have celebrated traditional irrigation technologies as contrary to the modern dam. So modern dam is problematic and traditional irrigation technologies are environmentally benign. But when I try to analyze many of these aspects, I have come to this conclusion that these technologies may not have the environmental aspects which now we are celebrating. It is a byproduct. They do not have large-term environmental negative impact. It's a byproduct, but that was not the objective with which they have developed the technology. So the technologies were developed for meeting the immediate local needs, and they have their own social and other aspects, which you have also analyzed in your other papers. So by that, what I mean, for instance, like this traditional irrigation technology in South Korea called Ahar Pine system, and it was completely dependent on local labor. So it is not possible without employing the local labor. And how the local labor was available at one point of time, or throughout the history, mostly it was based on a very regressive social system, where the labor is not valued. But the labor is an important component of that production system. If we see it as a technological ensemble, the technology is there, but technology also encompasses humans and the knowledge system. So in that technological ensemble, labor was devalued, and labor was used for producing those systems. And in the process, obviously, it was meeting the need, and it was not creating environmental harm. But in today's time, when we are trying to redefine the same technology as local technology, we are defining them in terms of environment, and we are ignoring the other aspect, like the labor aspect. So in that context, I think like the local technologies which you are trying to catalog, I think that would be a very important aspect to also identify the other kind of values. Like apart from the environmental values and apart from this binary between environment and economics, like other kind of utilitarian, social, cultural values which may have promoted for the growth of these kind of technologies. And the other question which you were trying to address, like the policy aspect, that's another challenge because like every technology comes with a social and material base, and that also keeps changing. So, for instance, like the traditional which was a dominant has now become alternative and has been replaced by other technologies. So, when it becomes an alternative from the dominant, all the social aspects also changes along with that. And with that, like the knowledge system, the knowledge component which is required to operationalize the system also often like erodes down. So like how, like when we are talking about identifying the technology, it is not only about like the artifacts, it is also about the knowledge system which was accompanied with that and the social organization related with that technology. And that is the biggest challenge, I think, from my point of view, like how we can think about reinventing or how it can continue when in practice it is more and more getting eroded.
Well, really important critique and comment, because I mean I completely agree with you. And when we started the catalog, I reread the book that Adrian edited about grassroots innovation, and they were, because we wanted to do something very practical, as we wanted it to be useful for the people in the communities, not for us the scholars. So, but on the other hand, I was certainly clear that it wasn't about the artifacts. This is why, for example, when we talk about this project with people from design, they were saying, "Oh, we should do some maps." So they were really get very excited about the material form, but we tried to keep on track with this fact that at the end we needed to talk more about the value, knowledge systems, and cultures, and the history of the community as taking part in the trajectory of the technology. Otherwise, we will lose completely ourselves. Also, as a social scientist, it was also important not to, I mean, to be clear about that because we were fetishizing the object in a sense that it's just mainly because we haven't done work with objects in our life. So it was like, oh, this is so interesting, we can take some pictures, but at the end, you're completely true. Like, this is what we, as a background for the catalog, we did very long interviews that were mostly about the history of the community, which I think they are very intertwined, entangled with the artifacts, and they're very difficult to see separate. As you said, like probably the question would be for the infrastructure: how can we create infrastructure that circulate not only the artifact but also the values that, for instance, in our case, the forms of hope. Because we were talking about very deprived areas of the countryside. So the forms of hope, they inspire. And we wrote that. Even in the catalog, in the more short description, what this is for people who want to be inspired of doing that and that. So I think your point is it's very important.
Okay.
I'm thinking of all the questions and answers, and it's helping me to connect some dots here, like, because there is this idea of value grammars, and we talk about value grammars as something that, the idea that technologies and innovations and also innovations are attached to different value grammars. And these are important in order to enable coordination. Different people have to share the same way that we need to share a grammar to be able to speak a language. We need to share these value grammars in order to be able to value things in similar ways, not to have like value conflicts, right? So, and the other thing is this way of thinking about technology. And I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, but I'm thinking like there is a focus on the artifact.
Yeah.
But one of the things, Marian, I have been thinking a lot recently, this idea of infrastructure, not infrastructure in the metaphorical sense, but infrastructure in the proper, like, material sense of electric grid, water systems, like all this essential stuff. So I suppose that the point is that these artifacts, there is a question of connectivity, right?
Yeah.
And unfortunately, very often we have this dependency on existing infrastructures, like electricity grids, water supply, all these sort of things. So the point is that you might develop this local value grammar, but the moment when you need to connect it with the infrastructure, where the value grammar is completely different, there is a clash.
Yes.
So the question is, how do you solve it without having this shared grammar that in some ways we are rejecting?
Well, this is difficult.
I'm not sure if the question is clear.
Maybe it's clear.
We did, like, it wasn't here in the presentation because this has to do with the work on energy, on distributed generation, but we did a paper that we published in the Energy Research and Social Science, which was called Plastic Infrastructures. And we were trying to deal with that, with this idea of using infrastructures as a political spaces for environmental transformation. And we compared two communities that deal with a solar infrastructure and how the different communities end up doing completely different stuff because of the values and knowledge systems. So, which I think, okay, this may be an answer, but it's unfair because you were trying, you are making the point about national level infrastructure such as
global,
commodity chain, transport,
yes. Exactly. Huge thing that we cannot really do without at the moment.
Yeah, I think we need to rework how to hack that. That infrastructures in order to bring other grammars. I think I'm not thinking in terms of substitution, but to open up the multiplicity of grammar to say, and this is going to be very complicated. For instance, the global transport chains, they will not stop because of the climate crisis. They will keep on. So how can we work with that? Or even energy, global energy, oil production, they will not divest. They will have to be pushed to divest. So which is a very strong political question. The moratorium, that nobody wants to talk about that, like mostly the Norwegians. They want to talk about net zero because they are pumping out petroleum, but how can we deal with that infrastructure? So you're completely true.
And that dependency, because these artifacts very often, not all, but I'm sure that to some degree they are not self-contained. They depend on this other, there are connections there, maybe you can connect it to a self-supplying wind power or more like autonomous, like solar panel or whatever. But then the question is, how was this solar panel produced? How was this was assembled? So the question of infrastructure is something that to me is so
you cannot escape.
And it's so difficult. Mario knows, he's being grappling with this internet infrastructure.
We talked about that in your.
Don't release our papers page, because otherwise the people in this room will copy us. No, I'm joking.
But you were talking about that in the session, in the plenary session. Which type of infrastructure do we need?
Internet submarine cables. How we can make it convivial. How we can build convivial submarine cables.
Absolutely.
How do you make this connection without surrendering to their value grammar? Because if let's say they need us less than we need infrastructure. The infrastructure is by definition power.
Punam is
I'm just going back to the paper that I circulated in the group, and there was a discussion about hierarchy, valuing or valuation rates. I think it's not always that, and we have to not always surrender to this apparently looking like a fixity of things. And Emily Moles and Fritz paper, where they talk about different registers in which different values become important. So if there are different things, an artifact or a technology or a different socio-technical ensemble in which they are fitting, and there are different values in which they will matter and they could matter. So of course there is a lot of power hierarchy in this infrastructure, but also there is a possibility to kind of redefine values. Also, thinking of value is not something that is extremely fixed, but value is a process in which evaluation as well as valorization happens simultaneously, and not something that is there and always be there. So I think thinking about value maybe not as a hierarchical thing, but more as a different registers in which different values may become important and may also coexist could be a good way of engaging with this debate of apparent fixity of these structures and no way out kind of thing.
Wow.
I mean, you are not forced. You are not
No, it's just a part of the conversation.
No.
It's not a question.
Oh, it's just very exciting to have this conversation because I think we share a lot of, we are pressing the same buttons in sort of the discussion. So